Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Football presented by BKCW. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by Bobby Burton and Jerry Hamilton. We are 57 days away from kickoff. Tell us who your favorite number 57 is or was, whichever one. Tell us where you're checking in from, what you're drinking. Get your questions in. We're going to get to all of them here in just a little bit. But let's start with the biggest news, I guess you could say. Not the best of news, but the biggest news. Five-star wide receiver Quinn Moore chooses Oregon last night, guys, announcing that as almost at nightfall. Your thoughts?
I wrote this yesterday on Texas football, and I'll believe it till the day I die. No one player ever makes or breaks the University of Texas. That's not why the University of Texas is who it is, and it's part of the reason why we are who we are. I mean, it is a collective group that works together, and so from that standpoint, it is part of the puzzle of recruiting to lose players. The second piece of it is, and Jerry and I agree on this, there are gut punches at times.
Oh yeah,
and losing Quinn Moore was a gut punch. That is a big time gut punch. I try to go back and think about ones that maybe got away like this. The most recent one in my memory, Jerry, was actually Quinn Ewers when he went to Ohio State as opposed to Texas out of high school. That was the one for me. Other people are mentioning guys like Adrian Peterson. I'll say this. I think Quinn Moore is a special prospect. And I think that that this is a big-time gut punch. There's no two questions about it. But don't let it override the reality of who and what Texas is as a football program. Granted, they are built, and we are built by who those players are. But I'm not one of those guys that just says the world's coming to an end because Quinn Moore went elsewhere. So don't expect that from me, I guess.
Oh,
Jerry lost his connection there a little bit. He was having problems earlier today as well. We'll see if he can come back at some point, Blake. But I look at it right now, and the idea that Quinn Moore is out there and committed to Oregon, in case you missed that news yesterday, is big. There's no doubt about that, and we'll have to see where and what all that means eventually. But we're going to take your questions, talk a little bit about Sark's history, recruiting 5 stars in the state of Texas. That at the wide receiver position today. We'll talk a little bit more about some other recruiting news coming up. We've got a couple of commitments that are expected to be announced tomorrow. We have Brandon Brown, who we believe is leaning to LSU at this point, expected to make his decision later today as well.
That's right, Bobby. And I want to go ahead and knock out a couple of super chats, if you don't mind here, so we can get those out of the way and let you comment on a couple of them while we wait for Jerry to come back. KD35, I am the best. He says, after last night, I'm not going to lie, official visits in June don't seem to even matter anymore. These aren't even football decisions. It's all about who's the highest bidder now when it comes to the eBay auction at the end. $1.3 million is insane. Your thought?
Yeah, I don't think it was 1.3. So I don't. First of all, thank you for the super chat. And whether you don't think visits in June matter or not, they most certainly do. That's the whole. We could talk about whether they do or don't, but they most certainly do. A couple of things. Jerry, and it's unfortunate, he received a text from Quinn's mom this morning saying that, in her opinion, it was not about money. Oregon didn't offer more money. This is from Quinn's mom. She felt her son felt like it was a better overall decision for him at Oregon. Here's the thing that has happened and why I don't know the exact numbers. Nobody will know the exact numbers except for Quinn Moore and his agent, to be honest with you, and maybe his mom. But the reality of it is, to a degree, Texas got out recruited here, because the things that I heard Quinn Moore say last night, I want to be different. I want to go do my own thing. You know what those are? Those are sales tactics. That's what Oregon has been using for the last 30 years to try to tell recruits. Okay, that's not a new thing. Texas is been having to deal with that from, I don't know. I mean, go do a new thing. Come up to Michigan. Go be different. Texas, to a degree, got out recruited in that regard. He got sold better by another team, in my opinion. And I mean that with all due respect to Steve Sarkeesian and his efforts and Jeff Banks, et cetera. Okay. But Rashad Samples is the son of Duncanville head coach Reginald Samples. Rashad has been a great recruiter his entire career, wherever he's been. And he's been a lot of places in a short period of time, 4 different places in 4 years. Dan Lanning has been a good recruiter. A number of other guys on that Oregon staff have been. And I think they sold the dream at Oregon, and they found a willing taker in DeCorian Moore. That's reality. Oregon comes with the same pitch. Come be different. Come to Oregon from Texas. You don't have to stay there. That's ultimately what every single person that watched the commitment yesterday saw him say and heard him say, Blake, I want to be different. And that is a sign, in my opinion, of a good recruiting job by Oregon, and maybe a failed one by Texas to not recognize that was the key and doing it. Now, I want to go on this a little bit. DeCorian Moore, at the same time, has been pushed back and forth multiple different places. Okay, here's Jerry back. Jerry, I told him what DeCorian's mom passed on to you earlier today about it not being about NIL, and then also told them that my feeling, at least, that Oregon at some level out-recruited Texas in this battle because everything that DeCorian Moore said last night about being different has been what Oregon has been preaching to people for 30 years in recruiting. Not just Dan Lanning, but anytime they come to Texas or Florida, come be different. Be part of something different. And it resonated, apparently, with DeCorian Moore, and or Texas didn't combat it well enough. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think we laid that out last 24 hours. There were all the factors pointing towards Texas. If he wanted to be different and blaze his own trail, it would be Oregon. And to me, that is exactly what he did. Sorry I missed some of the chat. I just had bad connection here. But I think basically that's what this came down to is he wanted to do something different. He wanted to blaze his own trail. I think a kid that he was always expected to go to Texas, right? But I think he wanted to blaze his own trail and do something different.
And the other thing I would say is, look, a lot of people in the chat are saying, well, I thought he was going to Texas. We all heard that he was leaning to Texas. Yeah, he was. And there is thought that he said, hey, I'm coming to Texas on his official visit to Texas. Yep. No one can deny that. Okay. They might try to recreate the truth of it, but that's the reality. So from that point, which was basically 2.5 weeks ago to today, he's committed to Oregon. In that time, he has visited Oregon. And, I feel like a lot of people are realizing that it wasn't just, I don't think it was just money here. I think it was, Texas got out recruited a little bit. They really did. I feel like that because they were able to sell something, and talk about that. And I feel like it's a little wish casting here, but this happens. I also want to say this. I don't want to point out DeCorian being some kind of bad kid or something because I don't feel that way. Other kids have committed to Texas and then ended up somewhere else.
Right, 100%.
This is why we always say, wait until it becomes public. So that's where it's at on DeCorian Moore at this point.
All right, guys, a couple of other super chats.
I need to hit on something here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I need to hit on something. I know it's part of the chat. But dude, if you think anybody comes in here to gaslight you, you're in the wrong place. So just move on. We don't do that. That's not what we're doing. You think we spend hours doing this to gaslight Texas fans or you're in the wrong place, man. Move on. All right, keep going.
All right, I got a couple of super chats that I want to get to since we're on the subject of DeCorian Moore before we change subjects. Jay Lee, thank you for the super chat. He says, the overreactions are insane. It's like some people don't listen to anything you try to tell us. DeCorian Moore was going where he wanted. Texas obviously can match any NIL. And then Rudy Serta says he had two opportunities to choose Texas, and he didn't. Time to move on.
Jerry, you and I talked about this morning. I'd like to give people your thoughts on this exact comment from Rudy, because I think it's so true.
Yeah, look, I think Texas, the thing about the recruiting process is if the staff has to keep going, right? What we had an interesting question here. Can Texas make a late push on Kelshawn Johnson? I think that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to watch here coming down to the wire, because he's announcing July 8th. He knows if you make a late push right now, probably why you're making a late push, right? These kids all see everything. But the staff has to keep going. But the one thing that I say,
hey, Jerry, I want to get you back on topic on this Rudy Serta question. And the reason why is he had two opportunities. DeCorian had two opportunities to choose Texas, and he didn't. You and I specifically talked about that. Okay. Maybe he just in his mind of minds did not want to go to Texas. And I know that's hard for some people to see it, but I mean, logically, he's going to a place that's 1,300 miles away and his family can't go see him every weekend. He's going to a place that has an offensive coordinator that's likely to be a Power 5 head coach elsewhere. That's better than 50-50 odds if you were to go get him in Vegas right now. Okay. He was recruited by a coach that's been at 4 different places in 4 years as his primary recruiter to Oregon. Okay. At some level, he just wants to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, is that not your take on that? I mean, at some level, does he just want to go somewhere other than Texas?
Do something a little different than what the people around him want him to do. I think that's the key. But I said this yesterday, and we're getting to this. I thought the family did a great job letting him be himself, make his own decision without trying to pressure him into a decision. We talked about this, and I give kudos to a family anytime, no matter. Look, we know that the family would have preferred him in Austin, Texas. I will always give credit to a family and a parent who sits back and lets their kid make their own decision and have their own mind. As long as you guide them in the process. All right, you made an emotional decision the first time with LSU. Let's back out of that. Figure out where you really want to be. He knew where all his family wanted him to be. I think that's a reason that he told Texas he was probably going there. But I think the reality is he wanted to be somewhere else. And he wants to blaze his own trail.
All right, guys, we got some more super chats here. This one from Longhorn Frenzy. He says, good morning from Lufkin, and thank you, Longhorn Frenzy. One player does not make or break a class. Recruiting is a different game than it was a few years ago. Get Lockett and French.
I think that's a good question. The question I have now, Jerry, is we talked about Texas wanting a true speed guy in this class. That had been circled and highlighted as DeCorian Moore. Now they're Lockett and French are not speed guys. Neither one of them. Now they're good players. Nobody's going to debate that, but they are not speed guys. The only other true speed guy they're really recruiting right now, in my opinion, is Kelshawn Johnson. So to your point, you just had, hey, well, now what does Kelshawn Johnson think, 2 days later or 24 hours later? That's going to be hard for Texas to overcome, right?
Yeah. I would think so. If any kid, somebody brought up to no kinds, if a kid commits to Texas in 3 days, both those kids are announced in July 8th, they just really want to be at Texas in a scenario like that. So Texas fans would welcome that right now. But that's tougher to overcome in recruiting, at least initially. So if one of those two guys, right now it looks like Kelshawn's A&M lean, Tanook Hines, USC or Notre Dame, as we get closer to these decisions. If one of those guys were to peel, if Texas made a late push, that would show you how much one of those guys really wants to be at Texas. That probably have meaning for some Texas fans right now, but that is a tougher ask right now in July than maybe it would be later in senior season.
There's a couple of others real quick that I just want to hit on. William Niche says, Texas, and thank you, William. Texas will be fine. Thank you for everything you guys do. You can't and you won't win them all. Hook them. And then Robert Pope says, one possibility, all those people in the living room, Texas may have been too close. Also, that NIL is going to hit by state taxes. So, true. All right, before we move on.
Taxes are bigger in the state of Oregon if you work up there, by the way. Just gonna say that.
Definitely so. All right, Bobby, tell folks how they can escape the insurance trap before we move on here.
Yeah, absolutely. BKCW is the show sponsor this morning. Thank you so much. Did your business have a frustrating insurance or employee benefits renewal? Most likely, you didn't hear from your agent all year, and then right before it's time to renew, the agent delivered bad news of a rate increase with no time to look for other options. When this happens, the agent is providing no value, and you're stuck in what we call the insurance trap. BKCW has risk consultants that specialize in many different industries, from construction and transportation companies to nonprofits, even school districts. So you'll get matched up with someone who knows your risks and can help you and your business escape the insurance trap. Get started with a free risk assessment at bkcw.com or send an email to info@bkcw.com to get started and get the support you deserve. Hey, Jerry, before we move on to other questions that people might have, I want to say this. You brought up the term gaslighting, okay? And for those unfamiliar, I don't want to mansplain to people here, but for those unfamiliar, gaslighting is the term of you're leading us on and telling us untruths in order to make assuage fears or make people feel better. That's decidedly not the case, what we do here.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And I want to give you a specific example of that. Within the last 24 to 48 hours, there were some people out there trying to tell people, oh, well, it doesn't matter what happens in June or July. We'll just wait till December. It'll be, if it's Oregon in June, it'll be Texas in December on DeCorian Moore. Okay. Those same people that were saying that, we never did. And we told you it mattered. Those same people that were trying to pitch that aren't saying that today. So don't tell us that we're gaslighting when we came out very clearly and said it does matter at the outset for the reasons that we illuminated and listed. So even though other people act that way, don't lump us into it. That's my point.
There you go. One other super chat, guys, and then we'll have those knocked out, I believe. And my apologies if that is not the case. But Dax Kilm here. Thank you, Dax. He says, is Sark controlling his culture narrative by not allowing our NIL gatekeepers the freedom to make offers until coach deems them a culture fit?
Here's my take on that briefly.
DeCorian Moore very badly.
Yeah. I don't think that's. Here's my take on that. Yes, the coach has the final say, in my opinion. Okay. He approved DeCorian Moore. Don't get wrong. Now, maybe he didn't want to pay as much as what DeCorian Moore wanted or could command on the open market. I could see that as a reason not to. But don't say that this guy wasn't a culture fit because Texas wanted him. He had actually committed to Texas on his visit. I mean, we can't backtrack. Sometimes bad news is what it is. It's bad news.
Right.
Yesterday was bad news. Now, the sign of a real champion is how you get up off the mat. And that's where I think that Texas has to figure out what they're doing. It's the same at defensive tackle recruiting right now. How do you get off the mat? You got knocked out. It's not about pointing blame or trying to, push narratives that this or that or people around him, et cetera. What matters is the end result. And I think that the culture narrative for Sark was fine with DK Moore. I do think that he's correct in some respects that paying a true freshman more than your best receivers on campus doesn't necessarily make sense. I mean, if you can go get a first-round receiver like Adonai Mitchell in the portal, why would you necessarily, or second round, excuse me, why would you necessarily do that with a true freshman? Fair. But by the way, speaking of true freshmen, I talked to someone yesterday in the agent world that has been hearing some things. Ryan Wingo, our young freshman wide receiver, is having a pretty good summer. I'll just put it that way, according to some people that have seen him work out with other Texas receivers. They just got back to putting the ball on the field a little bit, Jerry, this past week, and he's looking really good.
I also want to say something on DeCorian Moore, though, because I know Texas fans are upset. I get it. But I want to take a second on the kid, though. And I know people don't care, but I want to be fair to this, because I think there's out there, well, he doesn't want to compete, so he's not coming to Texas. Dude, this kid's hyper competitive. You go anywhere you go, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, whatever. At that level, there's competition. Oregon could go get somebody really good in the portal. He knows that 4 months from now. DeCorian Moore is not scared of competition. He wasn't going to a place. I said this the other day. When you're that level player, you're not looking for somewhere you're guaranteed you're going to go start. And that's not what he did with this decision. This is a extremely competitive, extremely hardworking kid that if he stays on the path he's on, and if he maintains that, then he's going to be a first-round pick. That's just a level talent he is. And I know that's what makes the Texas fan base even a little more angry, and the adjectives up. I get it. But I don't want – the one thing I want to be fair to is a kid's in these situations too, no matter how much it's painful it is if a kid doesn't pick a school. This kid works his butt off. He's a rare freshman on varsity at Duncanville when they're rolling. That guy trains really hard with D-Rob up there in Dallas area. He competes his butt off in track. He's a competitor. And the only way he's not going to go be a really good player in a first-round pick is major injury, which you can't control, or if he stops that process, which he hasn't shown any signs that he's going to do that yet. He's a hyper-competitive kid. So I just want to say that about the kid, because I don't want him, look, I'm fair to these kids. And that's my thoughts on him.
Hey, real quick, guys, I see some super chats coming in, and I got one of them fixed. But Heath Dillard, I did not get your question with your super chat, and the chat is very busy. So you might send it a couple times over the next few minutes to make sure that I see it and can fix that for you. But other than that, we got a few others that we need to get to. Tariq here says, is it surprising that Texas made the college football playoff and won the Big 12, but it hasn't yet impacted this year's class? Y'all's thoughts?
I think it's impacted this year's class a little. I'm not sure. For example, Amari Winston is committed to Texas at this point without that run in the playoffs last year. I'm not sure, I feel like it certainly has had an impact to Tariq. I don't know that it's had as large of an impact as maybe people would have hoped. That's a fair assessment right now. Again, recruiting is not over until December, so you can't sit here and say it. I mean, look, tomorrow or later today, Brandon Brown makes an announcement. We think that's LSU at this point. It could be Oklahoma or Texas, but we think it's LSU at this point.
That's between 1 and 2 Central Time, by the way, per the family member yesterday.
Yeah, and then also you have Cade Phillips tomorrow, safety out of Hightower that Texas has prioritized from day one, a 24-foot plus long jumper, 6'2", 185. There are guys out there that Texas is getting. Are they dominoing on every single player? The clear answer to that is no, not at this time.
Right. I want to bring this one up. So just so we understand this, when I started using the term recruit through the whistle, it's because coaches ask players to play through the whistle. So we ask coaches to recruit through the whistle. And what that is, that's not just about flips. I think people just take it as flips. That is recruits that don't decide early and they go to December or during the season, which there's Nick Brooks that's going to go to August or September, probably September. You got to keep recruiting him, even if you think you're in a good position for him. There's senior year evaluations. There's guys you work to flip. There's multiple things. That's what we're talking about here. It's not just trying to flip a guy. It's that these coaches don't move on to their B-list players and they stick with their A-list players and they continue on with the evaluation process through senior season. If you think back to last year's class, Xavier Filsaime and Aaron Butler didn't have an offer from Texas right now. Didn't have an offer from Texas. Both top 150 type prospects in the country. Brandon Baker wasn't committed to Texas. Brian Wingo wasn't committed to Texas. Kobe Black wasn't committed to Texas publicly. Wingo publicly. Okay, you have to recruit these guys to, maybe if you want me to say to signing day, I'll say to signing day. But the reason I started using that term is because we were talking one time and coaches ask players to play through the whistle. Well, then coaches recruit through the whistle. That's what it is. So I know people hate it all right now. I get it, but just understand what we're saying.
People confuse. Here's the problem. People confuse the message with the messenger. They want to lump the messenger in with the message, which is part of the unfortunate aspect of this. I have no problem, Jerry, with the term recruit through the list because exactly what you said. It's realistic. And believe it or not, it's what Sark's going to continue to do, whether you like that term or not.
You want him to move on to those B-list guys and fill a class? How'd that work out?
He could have done that and not gotten Cam Williams, Nato Mazzullo, DJ Campbell. Who else? Malik Ogbo. He could have done that. Would have been real fun right now, huh? Texas wouldn't have made the Final Four last year. I can tell you that much.
We got some more super chats, guys, and Heath Dillard. I'm still looking for yours. Let's go to Dustin White. He says, is there someone on the Texas staff that maybe turned him off to Texas? I can't imagine that being the case.
I hadn't heard that.
No.
Have you heard anything like that, Jerry?
I have not to this point. No.
Yeah. I will say that I think that Rashad Samples probably had the best relationship there of all coaches recruiting him. And I think that was maybe undervalued by some because Samples is a running back coach, frankly, at Oregon. He's not even the wide receivers coach, but we'll see.
But I also want to say this too. And I haven't heard it, but I just want to be clear about something. Reginald Samples didn't try to push.
Oh, no.
Because before anybody asked that didn't happen. Reginald Samples is beyond that. That just didn't happen. So just to be clear on that, just like he didn't try to push Colin Simmons to Texas or LSU. Reginald Samples is running his program, and he is very much a disciplinarian in that program. He is not trying to push a kid to a college. I first met Reginald Samples 30 years ago.
I met Reginald Samples 30 years ago when he was the head coach at Dallas Lincoln. He was straight down the middle then. He's straight down the middle today.
Yeah.
That hadn't changed.
So I just don't want that.
His son's getting paid by Oregon. So whoever writes your check is the guy. You know? So that's a little bit different. But I agree with you.
A couple more of these supers here. Major Alexander says, name a great Oregon wide receiver that went on to play in the NFL. I think the last Oregon receiver taken in the first round was 25, 30 years ago.
As of last night at 9, I'll get back to me in 3 years. I have one.
Hey, I want to say this. You know who it was? It was somebody that was named different when he was in college. Bobby Moore was his name. And now you know who he is? He's Ahmad Rashad.
Jordan's best friend, yes.
Yeah.
And then Major Alexander with another one, guys. He says Texas A&M purchased the class. How did that work out?
It hadn't worked out real well yet. We agree with that. I mean, this is one of the things that you don't want to get into. I feel like, look, there are a lot of slings and arrows right now. Texas will, and Steve Sarkeesian will survive them. And he will go out and put together a recruiting class that we're going to track and follow and make sure we're on top of. A&M, what they did was a little obscene. And I think that's where Nick Saban was no spring chick as it related to NIL before NIL was NIL. Anybody thinking that he was is just kind of absurd. But the point being here, when he went after Jimbo, was the absurdity of what A&M did in that class. Okay. Oregon seems to be trying to do something similar, but they're actually using probably real NIL to do so, and legal NIL to do so. So we'll see where all that comes out. I don't think Dan Lanning is necessarily Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher was a little out of touch.
Yeah.
Dan Lanning seems a little bit more in touch. He has a little bit better staff right now than Jimbo Fisher had, in my opinion, as well. So I don't necessarily equate the two. We'll see how it goes.
I think, look, we weren't doing this at the time, but going back to that class that year, there were some guys in that class that were potential issues for A&M in that 2022 class, and that came home to roost. I don't think, from what I know, that Oregon's making the same mistake with some of these kids.
Same director of recruiting, by the way, at A&M. Marshall Malchow is now at Oregon. That was at A&M 3 years ago. He's a big piece of this. And the one thing that I would say that Oregon and some other teams have got is the organization that they're putting together and the guys that they're going after. It seems very pointed. And it seems well thought out. They're doing a good job recruiting. They're going to end up with possibly a #1 recruiting class in the country. Hats off to them. You know, at the same time, I'm more concerned about what Texas does tomorrow than what Oregon does today. So,
all right, guys, a couple others to knock out as well. Excuse me. Juan Garza, Bobby or Jerry, does Texas need, and I think he means need, an NIL director? And was Texas ever really a player, or did he keep them in there because of his family?
Jerry, you want to take that?
Does Texas, Bobby, what does he specifically mean by that question?
An NIL director, I think, is someone like a Marshall Malchow that is coordinating with the coaches. So Texas has a GM in Brandon Harris, but we talked about this before. He's not an NFL GM. An NFL GM is overseeing an NFL GM is overseeing payroll, personnel moves, etc. Right? And Brandon Harris is not really in charge of that. He's a conduit for Steve Sarkeesian at a level, whereas I think that other schools have true GMs now. And so I think that's what an NIL director is in their sense, deciding how funds are dispersed, et cetera. I think that is actually the head coach that's doing that at the University of Texas, would be my guess. So did the second part of this question, did his family keep him from going to Texas? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, to what DeCoria's mom said, they sold him better. He saw himself as a better fit at Oregon. I don't know that his family kept him from that. His mom wanted him to go to Texas. Would have been much easier for her and that family.
Okay, before we move on, guys, we need to tell folks out there about our sponsor today, and there's no better person to do that than our very own Jerry Hamilton.
Man, 5.0s are out. Sizzle alert, this summer, let the only thing smoking at your barbecue be the grill, not your grooming game. Get ready for the ultimate cookout this season with Manscaped. Whether you're flipping burgers or cannonballing into the pool, make sure your meat looks neat with the Performance 5.0 Ultra. Fire up your grooming routine and keep it cool with Manscaped. Head to manscaped.com and use code ONTEXAS, all caps, for 20% off plus free shipping. Let's make this summer sizzle for all the right reasons. Look, introducing The Weed Whacker 2.0. Keep your ears and nose as tidy as your hedges next door with our Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer. Pesky hair be gone. Perfect for impressing guests at your summer cookout. Manscaped.com on Texas. Okay.
We want to thank them for sponsoring today's show and a lot more questions to get to here. Let's try to knock out the rest of these supers. Travis Bingham, thank you, Travis. Is Phil Knight the puppet master being claimed each time and we can't compete? We're going to lose Pettijohn to NIL to Ohio State. So what's the plan?
You're not going to lose Pettijohn. So Phil Knight, first of all, knows probably the names of half the players on Oregon's team. Okay. Now, it may be some of his subordinates helping him do this. He doesn't know who DeCorian Moore is. He really doesn't. He doesn't know who half the players on the team are, much less the starters. Or, so let's be clear on that. So he's not this great puppet master. His money may be, because he's put some money to work as part of it. The second piece is Texas isn't losing Riley Pettijohn because of NIL. That's absurd. Absurd. And I'm not trying to be rude about that. If Texas loses Riley Pettijohn, they lost Riley Pettijohn. Not because not because of anything else. I think that what's getting me a little bit here is the fact that DeCorian Moore is an outlier in some ways. He's the best in the country at his position.
Yes.
So somebody may be willing to pay up more. Riley Pettijohn's a really good player.
Yes.
Okay. Don't get me wrong. He's top 10, top 15 player in the state of Texas. Okay. Texas is going to match whatever NIL he gets. It's not like there's like some crazy number out there for him. I don't think he had a great visit at Texas, number one. And number two, I feel like he thinks maybe Texas has already got their big-time linebacker in Bo Barnes, and he wants to go somewhere where he can be the big-time linebacker. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And so it's not NIL why he's being lost. So I think me and Jerry may not be doing a good job communicating who is an NIL, a true NIL play here, and who, like DeCorian Moore is you could go above and beyond for him as an NIL guy because he's the number 5 player in the country or whatever, the number 1 wide receiver. Riley Pettijohn's going to be slotted. He's a really good player, top whatever in Texas. He's going to be slotted at a certain amount. He's not going to bust anybody's NIL bucket. Right. It doesn't work that way. So certain ones will. Adrian Peterson comes out. He'll bust your bucket, right? He'll break the number. Vince Young comes out today. He would break your number. The vast majority of those guys that we're talking about here aren't that way. And I think Texas probably got out-recruited for Riley Pettijohn as well. It happens. You're only gonna get 20 to 25. You're gonna try to attack 45 to 55. So you're gonna lose some.
And then our next one, fellas, comes from Justin Yarbrough, and we're going to do a couple of these comment ones next. Justin, thank you for the super chat. He says, Sark's very competitive himself. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in his office this morning because I'm sure he's not a happy camper.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I the last few days, not many happy campers. So like Bobby said earlier, see how we respond, how they respond, and how things move forward. I mean, sometimes that's a simple answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Look, nobody wants to see the number 1 receiver in the country who's at Duncanville High School not pick Texas in Austin in the building.
Yep.
Let me ask you this question. Let me ask you a question, Jerry. If Keelan Russell goes to Texas instead of Alabama, you think DeCorian Moore makes the same choice?
Yes.
Okay. So they weren't tied at the hip in any way. Okay.
Now, if they were tied at the hip, if they were tied at the hip, Keelan Russell wouldn't have committed to Alabama. He would have just gone on the Oregon visit. even though Oregon already had Achilles Smith Jr. in the class, or DeCorian Moore would have gone to visit Alabama. Neither one of those two things happened.
And then our next one is from Mr. T. Thank you, Mr. T. And I hope I got your comment right with your super chat here. If not, just let me know and we'll get back to it. He says, laughing out loud, all this crying and excuse making in the chat is crazy. Get over it and move on. Hook 'em, baby.
I want to say this, though. Look, we're everybody's agita is up, but I love that you guys are in here and have passion at the same time. I may take offense to somebody saying I'm trying to gaslight the Texas fan base. To me, that's asinine, but I do love your passion at the same time. I want to be clear on that. Somebody asked, but I'm not just going to roll over and let somebody say we're trying to gaslight the Texas fan base. Give me a break. I put 36,000 miles on my car in 1 year already. You think I'm trying to gaslight the fan base? Give me a break. All right. Somebody asked, who do we think the next commit is? Tyler Rollo. Brandon Brown announces his final decision around 3 p.m. East Coast today, so 2 p.m. Central. I don't think that's going Texas way. We'll see. Look, maybe Texas pulls off a surprise. I think it's Texas. I think it's LSU or Oklahoma. So what we get to, the next guy Texas better get Cade Phillips on July 6th, because that's a kid that they've been in a pretty good position for. And even LSU knows that, and they've adapted in recruiting to that. But now Texas waits on that decision. July 8th, Nicholas Townsend, the tight end from Decaney, who Bobby and I think is a tremendous prospect, the top 100 prospect at tight end or defensive end if he played defensive end or linebacker. That's one that a lot of colleges think is probably going Texas way. Texas needs to close that out. Those two guys are tremendous prospects. So who's the next commitments for Texas? Right now, it needs to be the guys that they're in a really good position for, if you ask me. They need to close those recruitments out.
Yeah, Cade Phillips would be the odds-on favorite to be the next one. Now, I don't know. Brandon Brown's there's an element of a wild card there. There's also Lamont Rogers announces on July 6th. We feel like Missouri probably is the favorite there, though. Jerry's been saying this all along, that he really liked the Missouri offensive line coach. I don't think that's changed in the last 24 hours. Yeah. So we'll see how it all goes. But the next one that if I were betting, and I don't bet on this stuff, if I were betting, I'd say that Cade Phillips is the most likely one.
All right, and then some other super chats, guys. Jay Lee says, I'm not manscaping again until we get a 5-star commit.
That's TMI, my man. TMI.
Jamie French is announcing August 30th as of right now. Ooh. All right.
Yeah. Who's he announcing?
Fatusi's August 22nd, 23rd, as of right now.
You got a while, Jay Lee. You got a while to wait and see what happens there. All right, guys. Jason Ablinski. Thank you, Jason. He says, so you're telling us all these top 50 recruits are choosing Oregon because of a sales pitch? Oregon is setting the market, and Sark is refusing to go along. That doesn't make DeCorian Moore or any other kid bad. Y'all's thoughts?
They may have with DeCorian Moore. They haven't with everybody they've recruited. I'll be blunt on that. So, DeCorian's mom said Oregon didn't offer more money. So you can take that for what you want. I do believe Oregon's being hyper aggressive with NIL, but I don't think that they're out of bounds compared to others. And there was a better sale. In my opinion, he wasn't even going to take a visit to Oregon. DeCorian Moore wasn't 3 weeks ago, Jerry. They got him to take a visit. They did a great sales job. You can say what you want, but they did a great sales job. And that's what it was. Think about this. And I go back to this. Who planted it in DeCorian Moore's head that he wanted to go do something different? Do you think he came up with that on his own? Or do you think that was, hey, man, come up to Oregon, do something different, be different?
Well, I think DeCorian.
I've covered recruiting for 30 years.
Right.
For 30 years, that is a sales pitch from a coach to a player that is repetitive over time that gets some resonance in that player's mind, so much so that he ends up restating what a coach says to him. That's salesmanship 101. That's exactly what he said last night. I want to go do something different. Well, who planted that idea of going to do something different in his head? Did he just come up with that on his own? Or did maybe Rashad Samples like take that and twist it and twist it and twist it until it became, the mantra of DeCorian Moore?
There's a question.
That's a sales pitch.
Vivek B asked this question, which I think is interesting. If it'll pull up for me. Okay. Does Texas have an Oregon problem at this point? I would say other than Georgia, everybody's got an Oregon problem right now.
Probably fair. Texas has been on the bad end of it 3 times. But, I mean, Look, Ohio State looks like they may be getting ready to lose a safety to Oregon.
Yeah.
To Jerry's point. It's fair.
And more questions, guys. Plenty of time to get your questions in, so please do so. We're going to get to as many as we can. A very lively chat today. And D Herring 5 here says A&M's director of recruiting is now at Oregon, and you're telling me this isn't about money. Kind of touching on what y'all just spoke about.
I'm not. Time out. We're not saying it's not. Money has a role. Okay, it is not the sole reason. A&M did a good job of recruiting those players too. Oregon is not breaking the market at the same level A&M was at that time. I'm just going to tell you that. Because sometimes it was a lot versus nothing with A&M.
Yeah.
So money plays a role. Oregon is playing in that ballpark, but they are not breaking the bank like some people are talking about. They are recruiting. They have Tosh Lupoy on that staff, the National Recruiter of the Year, a couple different years. They have multiple big-time recruiters on the Oregon staff, and they have the director of recruiting. I'm telling you, he's good. He's also very, very organized. Good, don't go in there and in my opinion, think it's all about money. You can't. It's not that simple. Some things are have multiple factors to them. The salesmanship was a factor. Money was certainly a factor and probably precluded Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, and everybody else from recruiting DeCorian Moore in the first place. But it wasn't the overwhelming only factor. And to act like that is if you think that and you're Texas, that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Very, very dangerous, because then you just think everything's that way, and it's not. You have to get kids to want to go there too, and want to be at your place.
I want to bring this up. I missed part of this, but Georgia keeps their great players in state. Look, they may hit 6 of 10 this year, maybe 7 in a great year. They've been averaging 3.5 of the top 10 out of the state in the last 3-4 years. So nobody keeps all the best players in state. Will Anderson went to Alabama. Okay. I mean, nobody keeps all these guys in state. I mean, it was the pre-Kirby era, but even when Mark Richt was there, they were winning at a pretty high level. But this is why obviously Kirby got the job. But Trevor Lawrence went to Clemson. Deshaun Watson went to Clemson. So no, they don't keep all their great players in state. They have a ton of great players, especially on the defensive front, and that helps you. But no, even look, if they sign 6 or 7 of the top 10 this year, that's a hell of a great year for Georgia keeping guys in state. But it's been 3 or 4.
Okay, some other super chats. We got a knockout. Juan Garza says, I think you won. He says, I think Oregon will be smart if Dan Lanning leaves for Florida. Will Stein will be head coach to keep offensive recruits here. I would not be surprised if that happens.
Yeah, I think it's more likely in this scenario that Dan Lanning stays and Will Stein leaves to go be the head coach at, I don't know, Iowa, and Kirk Ferentz, or, anywhere in between. There's a bunch of different places that are probably going to be willing to pay Will Stein $4 to $5 million a year after this year. That's just my take.
And
I got to bring one more up.
Oh, go ahead.
I love Zane and his contributions. That's not true in Louisiana.
Yeah, where's the number one player in Louisiana going this year? Is it not Harlan Berry?
They'll probably be at LSU, but Jakeem Stewart next year. Are they going to keep Jakeem Stewart? I'm not sure he ends up the number one player, but Arch Manning. I mean, look, they had to keep Leonard Fournette, but when Nick Saban was at Alabama, just go look at the history of that. Now Nick Saban's gone, so LSU fans are like, we should keep the best player in the state now. But when Nick was at Alabama, not always. So even the state of Louisiana, and they've won national titles with each of their last three coaches. Because probably a lot of it was because Nick Saban was at Alabama, but he got some of those guys. Landon Collins, I mean, just go back to that. Cam Robinson. Before that, Bobby, in Louisiana, their program was LSU was down a little bit, but FSU, a lot of people came in and took the number one player.
All right, guys, a few other super chats that we need to knock out here. And Thomas Quinn, Thomas Quinn, thank you for the super chat. He says, when do we start getting some wins that build momentum, like 5-star wins? We lost more yesterday, possibly Brown today, Rogers, Pettijohn tomorrow. Need to get this ball rolling.
Fair assessment. I think that Texas has lost momentum in recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say this, and Jerry, my thought process is a little bit different. Is how Sark recruits really made for summer recruiting? I mean, it's and I mean that, and I'm not trying to say that he's not good, because I think, I hope everybody understands. I think Steve Sarkeesian's a really, really good recruiter, and has proven to be. His way of recruiting, though, may not portend to great Junes and Julys typically for Texas, because he is a long-term relationship builder. And, now that these guys are trying to make decisions within 6 months, which it shouldn't be that big, but I feel like he likes the long-term play with recruits. I don't know. I guess my point is they're getting ready to lose some of these guys. I think they will go 0 for 3 on Brown, Rogers, and Pettijohn. To your point, Thomas Quinn, I think that tomorrow Cade Phillips is likely for Texas. So 1 of 4, I don't know who would be rated the highest out of those 4 if you really lined them up. I mean, is Cade Phillips the best safety in Texas? In my opinion, he is. I don't know that Pettijohn, Rogers are the best linebacker or offensive lineman in Texas. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think the other thing with the some of the blue blood programs, and Sark's taking more guys out of the portal every year, is you go after your A-list targets. If you don't get them, you go to the portal. Now, there's some give and take with that, because right now in recruiting, if you're like, oh, we'll go to the portal, and if we miss on a guy and fill our need, that's not popular right now. It's fun when portal season opens for fans, but right now it doesn't really matter as much. So I think that's kind of one of the things with the blue blood programs is if you swing and miss at the top target, and that's why you don't go to the B list of guys, you just go to the portal and fill the need. That's different conversations here. But that's kind of the reality of, I think, where Sark's at.
Let's see here.
This one right here, Blake. It needs to go next.
There's one I wanted to bring up.
Right here, Jerry. David Fights. Jerry, now that Corey Moore is committed to Oregon, do we have one fewer high?
He's the first one that did not work out so far in this cycle.
There you go.
There was something I was going to bring up here. Hold on. It was about the this one. I wanted to bring this one up. I wanted to be just real on this. Lang didn't want to go to Bama. Why would he go anywhere else? He didn't have the opportunity to go to Bama. That was Kalen DeBoer's job. and Kalen DeBoer took the job. He was the guy that Alabama wanted. Now, Dan Lanning and Sark were talked about, so they got nice contract extensions, but DeBoer was their number one guy.
Yeah, well, Sark got a phone call. So,
yeah, that's something. They got phone calls, but DeBoer was their guy.
I think it could have been different had Sark said, yes, I'm interested. That's my take on that. I think that's then they would have had a decision to make if Sark would have said, yes, I'm interested. Whenever a couple guys say no and they're not, there's a group. I don't know about that. Hey, Jerry, this is a good one from Trace. Who are our elite recruiters? Who's selling Texas at this point? Steve Sarkeesian is clearly one of those. I would say the other two, or three really. Kyle Flood, offensive line coach, has absolutely killed it in recruiting over the years. He may miss on one or two this year, but he's done extremely good work. Tashard Choice has killed it. There's no doubt about that at the running back job. And then Jeff Banks has been key to getting Texas back in on that I-20 corridor. Now, Jeff may be taking a little bit of lumps this morning with Decorian Moore, but I'd say those three. Johnny Nansen has a chance, I believe, to jump into that category with the work he did in the portal last year.
Yep. Okay, we got a few others to knock out, guys. Let's see here. Matthew Miller, does Texas push for Kelshawn French and Lockett harder now, Jerry?
Well, no, you can't push for French and Lockett harder than what Texas was. It'll be interesting with Kelshawn Johnson and Tanook Hines, who are both deciding July 8th. Does Texas try to make a push on one of those guys? And that's a late push with decisions coming July 8th. And what I said earlier, I know we've had a lot of people join the chat. If one of those guys ends up at Texas, that shows you how bad they really wanted to be at Texas, because these kids they're not dumb. They know that Decorian Moore just committed to Oregon. So if Texas, or if it was Decorian Moore committed to another school these guys were considering, and then another school came and made a big push at them, they understand why. So if one of those two kids ends up at Texas, they really, really want to be at Texas, because they both have Kelshawn Johnson's A&M lead, Mike Elko, Holman Wiggins on him every day, have been. USC and Notre Dame with Tanook Hines. Obviously, Tanook Hines' brother plays at Hawaii, but Notre Dame, USC there have been on him hard the whole time. If Texas tries to make a push on one of these two guys late, if one of those guys jumps, they really, really want to be at Texas. And as a Texas fan, that's probably what you want to hear right now.
I want to say this too. We talked about it early. With the departure of Decorian Moore, okay, or whatever you want to call that, Texas now needs a speed receiver. The other two speed guys that Texas brought in are the ones that Jerry's talking about: Tanook Hines and Kelshawn Johnson. Tanook's out of Spring Decaney, Kelshawn out of Hitchcock. So there needs to be an element of speed, like true elite speed, in this recruiting class at wide receiver, in my opinion. And Decorian Moore's headed to Oregon changes things, the dynamics of what that looks like for Texas. They need to go find a speed guy. Not sure who that's going to be it Johnson, Hines, or someone else.
Actually, Jay Lee made me laugh with this. Is Oregon in the top three for either Lockett or French? No. French's official visits were Texas, Tennessee, Miami, and then who am I forgetting there? LSU. Khalil Lockett was A&M, Texas, FSU, USC, LSU, Alabama. So no, but interesting note was, I'm sure Texas will be in touch with Dallas Wilson during the season as well. What is that Decorian Moore going there change anything for Dallas Wilson out of Tampa Tech High? We'll see.
Okay, guys, got a couple of other super chats here to knock out, and then I think we finally will be through all of them. And Jay Lee says it's Decorian Moore, karma for Schloss. Just kidding. LOL. So, yeah. And then Brandon Morgan, thank you, Brandon. He says, I wish we would have got more, but take it from a young guy like me that grew up playing ball and watching college every Saturday. Oregon was always the cool, different school to us Texas kids.
We've talked about this before. for really since Chip Kelly had it going at Oregon, and Phil Knight started kind of putting all the different uniforms together at Oregon. They became a cool school to kids. It's different. It's far away. It's different from anything in Florida, Southeast Texas. Now, but pre-Dan Lanning, they're recruiting at the highest level they ever have. Not that Mario Cristobal didn't do really good work there too, but the kids, it's always been harder for them to actually win out because of distance from home. Is NIL helping them a little bit there, Bobby, is the question as far as bridge that gap, because the travel has always been tough. But is the NIL part bridging the gap for them a little bit now? Because that is certainly possible.
I think it is. I think it's a good point. It before it was just shiny uniforms,
right?
That could attract you there. Shiny uniforms, shiny facilities, yada yada yada. Now it's shiny uniforms, shiny facilities, and really green money. They added a "and" to their list. It's a good point. It makes them a more realistic decision instead of just a fanciful one.
Hey, Bobby, why don't you tell folks out there about BKCW? Then we'll have time for just one or two more questions.
Yeah, BKCW is an insurance company that focuses on business insurance. And they also focus on getting you out of what they call the insurance trap. BKCW takes you out of the insurance trap by providing you with actual risk management consulting, not just price quoting. Operating out of its headquarters in Austin and owned by UT grad, BKCW uses a 5-step process to identify your business's weak spots, design a plan, execute it, and monitor your situation throughout the year so that you can lower your insurance costs and effectively manage your company's risks and employee benefits. BKCW has risk consultants that specialize in many different industries, from construction and transportation companies to nonprofits and school districts. So you'll get matched up with someone who knows your risks and can help you escape the insurance trap. Get started with a free risk assessment at bkcw.com or send an email to info@bkcw.com to get started and get the support you and your business deserve. That's bkcw.com.
Okay, guys, as I said, we got time for just a couple of more questions, and I got a important one that I wanted to answer from LL. He says, Blake, does the OTF OG code still work? Thank you. And I think there's no better time than now, Bobby, to tell everybody about that. I'm going to let you do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have the OTF OG code. So if you want to be an OG, join us on Texas Football. A lot of recruiting news going on right now. Jerry and I and Blake are all going to be at the SEC Media Days in 2 weeks. We got a house that people are going to be congregating at. All the people that work for On Texas Football during the week. The SEC Media Days are in Dallas at the Omni. We're going to be there, and we'll be bringing you guys a bunch of information as well as all the recruiting news that's breaking, latest and greatest right now on ontexasfootball.com. Use that code and you get $20 off a subscription for 1 year.
I'll bring this up from
and there will be no gaslighting. I'll add that.
I want to bring this up from an LSU fan because I love that all the fan bases come in here. It's fun conversation. If French or Lockett go to LSU, are you guys going to panic? Panic? No, because when you can go to the portal and get Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden, will the chat be as much fun? No, it will not be. But if panic, no.
I like Scott. Can we visit that house? All right, guys. We got one other super chat that I need to circle back to that I missed. Katie35, I'm the best. Thank you again for another super chat. He said, we knew it was over when Pete Thamel tweeted the garbage last night. Then he comes back and tweets again like it didn't even happen. Yeah, that was a little unfortunate for sure.
Yeah, if you missed it, Pete Thamel, ESPN senior college football writer, tweeted out last night that DeCorian Moore at 7:00 had committed to Oregon. Okay. Thamel talks to agents and knows what's going on a lot of times before other people. So DeCorian Moore's, I don't even know you. Yeah, well, DeCorian, somebody that knows you does know Pete Thamel. And it was clear that was the case after that. If anybody had any thoughts of it, what I think happened is this. Pete Thamel was told, hey, DeCorian's going to go on Instagram Live at 7:00 and announce his decision, or whatever time it was. Well, DeCorian Moore went on Instagram, but then he waited like 30 or 45 minutes or an hour.
Yeah, he was going to take questions from people before he announced for however long that was, an hour.
Yeah. And so that's all that happened. It made Thamel look bad and all that stuff, but he was doing his job. I don't begrudge people like that. I've been there before, actually. I don't know that I've ever made that mistake, but it happens. I don't begrudge Pete Thamel over that. It made him look bad, but it is part of the game. I mean, I can tell you this: an Oregon reporter did the exact same thing.
Yeah,
at 7:00 with quotes from DeCorian Moore, by the way, that they then took out of the story after they found out it wasn't true. So.
Okay, guys, we got 2 super chats here left, and then we are out of here. We're going to start with this one from Barb's 10. I like the alternate jerseys, but Oregon has jumped the shark here. Does anyone even know what their uniform is anymore? They do have lots of variations, but the kids love it.
It's not about what we like.
So what can you say?
Look, I'll say this. I didn't finish my point. When I was ESPN Under Armour for all those years doing the job nationally, a little bit before that, and you would talk to kids around the country. When kids threw out an early top 3 as a 15, 16-year-old kid, when they're really talented kids whose recruiting process started that early, 90% of the time Oregon was in it. So there's what maybe the adults look at and what the kids look at so different. And if anybody thinks that, if anybody doesn't agree with that, like go back to the interview I did a couple of 3 weeks ago with Sloan Thomas, Roy, and BJ. That's on Texas Football Archives. Because I always ask those guys, and Rod Babers talks about it, who was your team growing up? Because growing up to me is that 10 to 12 to 13-year-old, I call it the age of influence, when you identify with a team or a player or whatever it is. And all 3 of those guys said FSU. Now, Sloan was Florida or Florida State, which tells you how great of a recruiting job Mac Brown did at the time, by the way. But Florida State, Roy Williams. Florida State, BJ Johnson. Why? Peter Warrick, the uniforms, the way they won those Florida State games at the time. The one thing about recruiting that's never changed is these kids, when they're 10, 12, 13, they identify. Think about when DeCorian Moore initially made his decision that he was going to LSU. We talked about it. Odell Beckham Jr., that was his favorite player. That's what he wanted, to go to LSU and be Odell Beckham Jr. That's initially why he committed to LSU. Then he backed off of that and rethought his process. But that's the one thing that's never changed about recruiting. Just think about how many guys for years would reference TJ Ford or Kevin Durant in basketball, Vince Young in football at Texas. I think Texas is getting back to having identifiable players with kids, the younger kids coming up. And I think that's going to be something important to talk about in future years.
There you go.
All right. Hey, I had this one from Mr. T. Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Mr. T. This one is, I think, a good way to end this today. All this crying and excuse making in the chat is crazy. Get over it and move on. Hook 'em, baby. At the end of the day, other people can go to Oregon. I'm going to be at Texas. And so I think a lot of people in this chat feel the same way. And I said this at the very outset of this video and podcast. No one player makes or breaks Texas. To act like it does is not the truth. Texas lost Adrian Peterson and won a national championship while Adrian Peterson was on campus in Norman. One of the great running backs of our time, if not the greatest. Okay. It's all the one thing about Texas. It is never bigger. You are never bigger than the school as a whole or the state, etc. It's a collective effort. And I agree with Mr. T there.
And I want to say this.
It's not valuable. Crying, not valuable. Get over it and move on. Let's go after the next best player that we can find.
I want to say this. I love everybody's passion. And I hope my passion comes through too, because if somebody says I'm gaslighting a fan base, my passion's going to come through on that, because it's BS. You don't take 10 days on the road traveling. Anybody that does that, 10 days traveling 2,000 miles going to see all the kids that Texas is targeting. Why? So I can gaslight you? That's just dumb. Okay. But I do appreciate the passion behind it, because everybody's competitive. Everybody wants to win all these recruiting battles, and everybody wants to get all the players. I totally get it. I love your passion, appreciate your passion, but I'm not going to let you roll over me either.
Okay, we're going to end this after this last super chat here from Isaiah. I almost forgot it. My apologies, Isaiah, but we got you here. He says, when will we have a #1 recruiting class, and where will we land in recruiting when everything is done this year? I think that some luck has to go into getting a #1 recruiting class, obviously, but when?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you need to have a year in state where maybe there's 6, 7 5-star prospects, and you actually went out for 3 or 4 of those. You're going to need to have a 4 or 5, 6 5-star class. That, if you just look at recruiting rankings, Texas could have the #3 class one year, and I might say, in my opinion, that's the #1 class. And that's not just because we're covering Texas; it just may be my opinion. But as far as the recruiting rankings go, you're going to need to have a class with 5 or 6 5-star players, and probably 8 to 10 top 150 players in the country behind it. That's really what you're looking at in terms of depth and front-end 5-star recruiting rankings talent. When that's going to happen for Texas, I don't have that answer. That's going to have to be when the state is absolutely loaded from a recruiting ranking standpoint. It's loaded in talent every year, but from a recruiting ranking standpoint, and you went out for 4 or 5 of those guys, and then you go around the country and you pluck a few national guys. That's what's in its cake. I don't see a time where Texas goes and gets 6 out-of-state 5-star prospects, Bobby, and makes a #1 class. It's still got to come within the state, and then you have to recruit nationally around it. But where's Texas going to end up this year? It's a good question. If they don't end up in the top 10 in this class, I'd be pretty upset, honestly, coming off a playoff run. But we'll see where it settles. But here's the thing: you have to get 3 5-star players to be a top 5 class. Right now, that's a reach for Texas after last night.
There you go. Okay, guys, so that's going to do it for today's action-packed episode of Coffee and Football, presented by BKCW. Want to thank them along with Manscaped for sponsoring today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. I said it in the chat, but and Jerry talked about it too, but it was cool to see all the fan bases. I think we had like LSU, Alabama, Oregon, OU, a lot of fan bases in the chat today. So that's awesome, especially when it's a civil conversation. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the great questions, the great super chats. And guys, I know y'all will be back here in a little bit, in a few hours. Bobby, you want to tell folks about that before we get out of here?
Yeah, 1 o'clock, we'll be back with a chat. Rod Baber's going to join Jerry and myself. CJ Vogel may be jumping in as well. We'll talk a little bit more about Decorian Moore if any other news leaks out about that. I'm not sure it will. Jerry, as we mentioned, talked to Decorian's mom earlier this morning, or got a text, and got their version of events. So we'll see what happens. We'll talk to you again at 1. Also, don't forget, if there's any news breaking, OTF on TexasFootball.com is the place to be. Brandon Brown announces around 2 o'clock Central as well. So we'll go from there.
Hey, one thing I wanted to add at the end, because I didn't say it earlier, we've had so much going on. As Wayne Oldham said, saying money has nothing to do with it is asinine. So here's what I want to say to this.
We're not saying that.
Right. But here's what I want to say to this. Here's what I want to say. This is what I believe in recruiting. Once you make a decision on a school you want to go to, if you don't go try to maximize that on the NIL end, you're missing an opportunity. So once somebody decides on a school that they want to go to, they dang sure better go try to maximize that other part of it.
There you go.
If they don't, they're making a mistake.
Again, the problem here, Jerry, remains people are not understanding. It is not just one factor why a guy money is a factor. It is
Right.
not the only factor.
Yeah.
Where did DeCorey Moore get the idea that he wanted to go somewhere different? Did he just come up with that on his own, or did Oregon coaches plant that? I know what happened. I've been covering recruiting 30 years. I guarantee you I know what happened. He bought into that line of thinking. They sold it, and he bought it. Hook, line, and sinker.
Okay, guys. Well, that will do it for today's show. The guys will be back here in just a little bit. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell so you're notified anytime we go live or post a video. And between that and on TexasFootball.com, you won't miss a thing. So for Bobby Burton and Jerry Hamilton, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you next time.
Hook up.